So, this morning's speaker is fellowship member Amber Miller-Adamany. Amber's a former Mississippi River naturalist, originally from Prairie du Chien, which many of you know is a river town nestled between the Mississippi River and the Bluffs. She holds an undergraduate degree in biology and English writing, where she explored the intersection of poetics and science, as well as a master's degree in biology. Her graduate research focused on invasive grasses and their impacts on floodplain forest restoration. Currently, Amber works at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, where she plans professional education events, including academic conferences and workshops. And she's the one who brought in Jakob, if you guys remember him a month ago. He was amazing. And helps manage online graduate programs. Her interests continue to center around curiosity, ecology, storytelling, and the ways humans relate to the natural world and to one another. Outside of work, she enjoys going to music festivals and camping with her 2 sons and mischievous dog, along with baking, which we've often been the benefit of here, reading and gardening. And she joined the Sunday service team within this past year and a half or so, and has been a delight to have a part of the team. So please welcome Amber.
Thank you, everybody. First, a little disclaimer. I will be making references to certain ideas in psychology, but I am not a psychologist or a mental health care professional. In fact, I am an ongoing recipient of mental health care. Feels like a lifetime ago that I fought an intense battle with a broken brain for several years that required a handful of stays in an inpatient mental health care facility before I found stability, and this continues to require my consistent input to maintain. As a perpetual student, I've since done a lot of reading and thinking about various concepts in mental health, so while I'm by no means an expert, I do have some thoughts to share. So darkness as a pathway to growth. First, let me set the stage for what I mean by darkness. Darkness can be grief, it can be fear, uncertainty, loneliness, depression, illness or injury, trauma, or simply a realization that the old familiar versions of ourselves no longer fits and the new one has yet to emerge. We know darkness when we can no longer pretend that everything is fine, when we're put in a situation where we don't know who we are, how things work, or how to relate to others. Take a moment and ask yourself, what is my relationship to darkness? Keep this in mind as we navigate the idea of darkness as a pathway to growth. Here at UU, we're often invited to reflect on awakening curiosity. We tend to associate curiosity with discovery as something shiny and bright, something wondrous, and it certainly can be. But what happens if we broaden our perspective of when and how curiosity might function in our lives? What if it can help us meet the inevitable darkness that visits every human life? The lost job, the long illness, the heart-wrenching divorce. Can we learn to use curiosity as a tool that helps us stay present with what is uncomfortable, even unbearable? Can we use that presence then to fuel our growth as human beings? Today, I'd like to explore what biology, philosophy, and lived experience can teach us about darkness, that it is not necessarily an enemy to defeat, but a condition that can foster growth, healing, and transformation when met with compassion and curiosity. Most of us are taught directly or indirectly that darkness, fear, and pain are things to escape as quickly as possible. We talk about moving on, getting back to normal, finding the light at the end of the tunnel. Yet loss, grief, depression, uncertainty, and trauma are part of the human experience. We can't always outrun them, and maybe we shouldn't try. I'm not saying that suffering is good or that pain is something to celebrate, but when darkness inevitably arrives, curiosity offers an alternative to fear. It asks, what needs my attention? What needs my care? Darkness isn't problematic simply because it exists. It's problematic when it is unobserved, when it is avoided. With my academic roots in biology, I can't resist pointing out that from a biological perspective, growth often occurs or at least begins in literal darkness, as Carmen educated us this morning. Seeds germinate underground, protected from light, while they reorganize themselves from a dormant state into a growing plant. Roots spend their entire lives in darkness, anchoring and nourishing the plant, even communicating with other plants via vast underground fungal networks. Many animals also rely on darkness for essential processes. Our bodies release melatonin in response to darkness, helping regulate sleep, during which operations like tissue repair, memory consolidation, and immune system maintenance can occur. Ecologically speaking, decomposition occurs largely out of sight. Soil microbes break down what was, driving the nutrient cycles that are critical for ecosystem survival as a whole. Nature is full of examples in which darkness is not a mistake in the system, but a necessary condition for renewal. If darkness is built into the natural world, we shouldn't be surprised that it shows up in our above-ground, waking human lives as well. So why do so many of us spend enormous amounts of energy trying to avoid it? One of the places this intense avoidance becomes most apparent is with grief. Grief may be the most honest form of darkness we experience. Our culture often treats grief like a problem with a deadline. We wonder whether someone is moving on quickly enough or healing properly. We talk about closure as though loss is something that can be neatly wrapped up and put away. But grief is not a problem to solve. Anyone who has lost someone they love knows that grief doesn't really end. Instead, it changes shape. We learn how to carry it. We make room for it. We allow it to become part of our story. In that sense, growth doesn't mean getting over grief. Growth means learning to live alongside it without letting it harden us or isolate us. As contemporary poet Rune Lazuli puts it, I am not looking to escape my darkness. I am learning to love myself there. And that brings us to another important truth about darkness. The real danger is often not the darkness itself. The danger is disconnection. Psychologist Dr. Edith Spiro describes it this way. When we are mired in darkness, we can become dissociated with ourselves and others. She emphasizes this idea of disconnection and asserts that such a rupture can destroy our connection with our support network and our sense of belonging in her book titled The Unexpected Gift of Trauma, The Path to Post-Traumatic Growth. Spiro also reminds us of what so many understand inherently, even if only in the subconscious. Human beings have the remarkable capability to endure hardship when they remain connected to themselves, to other people, to community, and to meaning. This is one reason why our UU community matters. We gather not because we have solved life's mysteries, but because none of us are meant to face them alone. We bear witness to one another's joys and sorrows. We remind each other that even when we feel lost, we still belong. As we often say here, it is good to be together. Togetherness, community, a sense of belonging, these things can drive post-traumatic growth in stunning ways. In fact, psychologists Drs. Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun have found that some people with support experience a greater appreciation for life, deeper relationships, increased personal strength, clarified priorities, and spiritual or philosophical deepening. Post-traumatic growth may occur not because of the pain itself, but because of the meaning people make from it and the support they receive while moving through it. They are not saying that suffering automatically makes us stronger. This is no pull yourself up by the bootstraps sort of situation. I find that distinction important, as did Dr. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and wrote that when we can no longer change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Frankl and others in this space do not mean that suffering is good or desirable. They are not saying that trauma somehow builds character. Meaning-making in the aftermath of trauma does. Or to put it another way, the darkness doesn't do the growing for us. Like the seeds germinating underground, the darkness simply creates the conditions in which growth is possible. And even then, growth is not guaranteed. It requires honesty, support, compassion. It requires daily conscious awareness of our intention to move beyond the traumatic event or situation without dismissing or downplaying the difficulties we're going through. It's hard work, and it's a balance. Mental health professionals sometimes speak of a window of tolerance, the zone in which the challenge is difficult enough to promote growth, but not so crushing that it shuts us down. Too little challenge, and we stagnate. Too much, and we become overwhelmed. Growth requires both challenge and safety. Darkness becomes transformative, not because it exists, but because it is survivable, because someone sits beside us in it. Because when we engage in curiosity, we learn to stay present long enough to discover what the darkness contains without being overcome by fear. Fear, perhaps the most visceral representation of darkness. Think about some of the moments that shape our lives: falling in love, becoming a parent, speaking an uncomfortable truth, changing careers, ending a relationship, grieving a loss, standing up for something we care about. These moments are rarely free from fear. In fact, the presence of fear often signals that we have arrived at something meaningful. The Stoics understood this well. Greek and Roman philosophers who lived about 2,000 years ago, the Stoics were less interested in abstract theories than in a practical question. How do we live well in a world that includes loss, uncertainty, and hardship? Epictetus taught that it is not the events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about those events. Fear says something important is happening, and then our minds often add a second layer, and because I'm afraid, something must be wrong. The Stoics encouraged people to pause between the event and the judgment. Instead of immediately concluding that fear means danger, they asked us to examine our perception. What story am I telling myself about this experience? Is this fear warning me of genuine harm, or is it simply the discomfort of becoming something new? Marcus Aurelius took this idea even further. He wrote that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Rather than viewing obstacles as detours from life, he suggested that they are often the path themselves. The challenge, the uncertainty, the fear, these may be the exact conditions that lead to growth. 13th century Persian poet, scholar, and Sufi mystic Rumi put it another way. He said, "As you start to walk on the way appears." We often believe we need clarity before we can take the next step, but much of life unfolds not through certainty, but through movement. Curiosity allows us to take the next step even when we cannot yet see the whole path. As I was preparing this reflection, I kept returning to a simple image from nature. A seed germinating underground has no way of knowing what sunlight looks like. It can't see the future plant it will become. All it knows is darkness. But something within that seed keeps unfolding, not because the darkness disappears or because certainty arrives, but because growth is already underway. The same can be true for us. Maybe we spend too much time waiting for the fog to lift before we allow ourselves to live. We're waiting until we're less afraid or when we feel sure. We're waiting until we feel whole again. But life is happening now, even in the darkness. So the invitation of curiosity is not to ask, when will this darkness end? The better question is, what is growing here that I cannot yet see? And perhaps if we remain curious long enough, we may discover that darkness is not an empty void. It is simply the place where we cannot see what is becoming possible. I'd like to close with a poem by Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke, "Let This Darkness Be a Bell Tower." Quiet friend who has come so far, feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower, and you the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. Move back and forth into the change. What is it like, such intensity of pain? If the drink is bitter, turn yourself to wine. In this uncontainable night, be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses, the meaning discovered there. And if the world has ceased to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing water speak, I am. Thanks.